Shalom and welcome to Nourish Your Biblical Roots Conversations with Yael. I'm your host, Yael Eckstein, President and CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And through my work with the fellowship, I have had incredible privileges to meet so many people who have devoted their lives to Israel. Servants, soldiers, writers, thinkers, many of them I can also call friends, and occasionally I can also say that they're family. This week's guest checks all of those boxes. I am so excited to welcome to the podcast Ari Harow, an Israeli originally born in America who grew up here in the Holy Land, served in the IDF as well as the Israeli government. And on top of being a public figure and someone that everyone loves, he's also my brother-in-law. Ari served as Prime Minister Netanyahu's chief of staff during Israel's last major war. In 2014 Operation Protective Edge, he was in the government. And in the wake of the October 7th attacks and the ongoing war in Gaza, he's been sharing many of his experiences and insights in his new book, My Brother's Keeper. Not only of the historical situation that Israel faces right now, but how decades of conflict and threats have shaped what the Jewish state and the Jewish people face today. He was forefront of many of those conflicts and many of those decisions. So today, I want to talk not only about Ari's experience in Israel's government and military and how he sees the situation in the Holy Land through those lenses, but about his life as an American, as an Israeli, as a veteran, as a public servant, as a Jew, and as a father. So Ari, welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Yael. It's so exciting to be here with you.
I have so much I want to talk to you about because we've had many late night talks, Shabbat table discussions, and everything you say just engages me and everyone that's there. You have such a unique perspective and so much wisdom. But let's start with your personal life. You are an Ole. You made Aliyah to Israel when you were a child from California. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood, your memories of making Aliyah, and about your family's move to Israel?
Of course. So I was born in Los Angeles in the early 70s and to a very Zionistic family. And when I say family in this sense, it's not just my parents, it's the entire extended Harow family, my grandparents, my uncles and aunts. They were very, very active and really pillars in the Los Angeles community, not only for Jewish causes, but causes that supported the state of Israel. And I grew up on stories not only of the trips and the voyages that my grandparents and my parents made to Israel. I mean, they made their first trip to Israel, I believe, within a few years of the creation of the state. I mean, I think maybe, I don't remember the exact year, in the early 50s, they took the family to visit the state of Israel. And that activity never ended. My parents or my father grew up going to Israel regularly, and they were very active in B'nai Akiva and other such organizations. So it was always a very, very Zionistic family. And I, as a child, came to Israel quite often. We had an uncle and aunt that lived at the time in Petah Tikva, and we would come to Israel during the summers. And when I got to the age of 11, my parents started sending me to summer camp in Israel. And with the knowledge that we were going to be making Aliyah, moving here sometime soon. So when we actually did move, it was not really shocking. It was something that I had, I guess, grown up to believe was going to happen. That really is, the transition to when we got here.
Incredible. So from a young age, your parents made sure that you felt emotionally and even physically connected to Israel. So when you made that big move, it wouldn't be traumatic or even dramatic, but a natural transition, which sounds like such a healthy way to do it. And from the time you were born, you knew that Israel was ultimately home. You use the word Zionistic family and you use Zionism a lot. And it makes me realize how today, perhaps, Zionism has a very different context from when you were growing up in the 70s. Or maybe not. When you say that you grew up in a Zionist family, what does that mean to you? And do you think it's the same as people who would say they grew up in a Zionist family today?
Well, there's no question that historical context is definitely very relevant when you talk about any type of ideology and emotional beliefs. In the 70s and the 80s, Israel was considered by many Americans, not just Jews, right, but as a faraway Middle Eastern sort of backwards country, right? When you made Aliyah, you did not have the luxuries, you didn't have the products, you didn't have the conveniences that you had in the United States, and it was it was perceived as a very difficult move. So back in those days, it really was a deep-seated belief, almost I would say, theological belief in the direction that we as a family were taking, but part of a much greater cause. And with time, and I think this is, fantastic and miraculous, as you see the transition of the state of Israel, and you see Israel really closing the gap in many, many ways. I mean, I can tell you, I travel quite often to the US to spend time with my wife, with your sister. And once upon a time, when people travel to the US, you'd come back with suitcases full of, different things. I don't take anything with me anymore because there's pretty much anything you need here in Israel. And while that is a material way of looking at things, it just shows how it's become a little bit easier for people to envision themselves making that transition. So I don't think that the element of Zionism has necessarily changed. There's still a deep-seated belief by people who come here, and it's tremendous to uproot themselves, their families, similar to the commandment that Abraham was given, right? To leave your home place, your language, your family, and come here. So while the challenges tend to change and history changes, I think that deep, the deep-seated elements of Zionism remain the same.
Incredible, incredible. And it's that longing for Zion, that longing for home that has followed the Jewish people for thousands of years. And you and I both are so privileged, lucky that we live in a time where you could just make that decision to get up and follow those steps of Abraham and relocate your life to Israel. But we both know that even within the relative ease today compared to the 70s, for sure, it's still difficult in the sense of culturally. I know many olim, new immigrants, who say, I will never fully feel Israeli, but at least my children will, at least my grandchildren will. I'm doing this for the future generations. You've been through a journey here in Israel and you came relatively young that it seems like you feel pretty Israeli. Was there a moment in your life that suddenly you took your own personal identity from being a kid from Los Angeles to being a proud Israeli, and that was your identity?
Yes, there was that moment, and that moment, in essence, was really when I joined the IDF. My parents moved here, and we started off in an absorption center, and from there they moved to their home in Karnei Shamron in Neve Eliza. In both those places, we were surrounded by other English speakers. So while there was a transition and schooling was in Hebrew and ordering of falafels in Hebrew, ultimately after school and in your social lives, we were talking English. We were speaking English. We were befriending people who had similar backgrounds and similar challenges. The Army is what changed that for me, joining the IDF. And it truly is a great equalizer in this country. It sort of merges together people not only from the type of background that I came from, but people from, richer homes and poorer homes, Ashkenazi and Sephardi, religious and non-religious, and in many cases even Jews and non-Jews. And to enter that world where there was Hebrew and there weren't any other languages, and there's army lingo, which is new to everybody at that point. That was really the moment where my path and the path of the state of Israel completely intertwined.
Wow. Wow. So You have served in the Israeli army. You've been dedicated to protecting this homeland. You've lost friends. I know every year on Yom HaZikaron, on Israel Remembrance Day, I read your posts and I see the names of your friends and the pictures. What did you do in the army, and what did that service mean to you?
So I served in the Golani Infantry Unit, and after nearly a year of basic training and advanced training, we ended up serving in a number of active zones. At the time, Israel had a presence in Lebanon, and we did a tour of duty inside Lebanon, and then another tour of duty in Judea and Samaria. So it gave us the experience of not just practicing and not just training in military activity, but actualizing it in real life situations. And there was a specific moment. It's actually the first time I ever publicly wrote anything when we were serving in Lebanon. And I guess I must have been around 20 years old at the time, and I was doing guard duty on this outpost that we were serving in, and out of nowhere, rockets started falling all around us. Hezbollah, by the way, no change. I mean, this was probably 1994.
Yeah. Now your
So
kids are experiencing the
right,
exact same thing in the army.
exactly, exactly. I mean, here we are 30 years later, and similar reality. Although back then we did not have red alert. We did not know the rockets were coming. Suddenly, suddenly there's rockets. And as I took cover and waited for the barrage to end, I thought to myself, how crazy is this that just a few years ago I was in school in Beverly Hills, and my friends today are on their college campuses.
Yeah.
I mean, college campuses were a lot safer back then, and they're having a good time, and they're going to parties, and they're going to sporting events, and they're moving on with their lives. And here I am, and I'm gonna start crying when I say this, but here I am protecting the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And it was such a glaring awakening for me that this is what my belief system, my upbringing, my religious beliefs, what my world has come to fruition through that work. And it was at that moment and that incident that really sort of, turned on the switch in my head.
It's incredible listening to it, because I think as any Israeli parent, you could relate to it so much from so many different sides. One is kind of that place of recognizing the decision just as an individual that you gave up a life of relative safety and luxury in order to come here. And just by living in Israel, every single person is defending Israel and the Jewish people. And now hearing what you're saying about the college campuses and about our youngsters who now go and defend Israel from this existential threat, as a parent, I look at it so different. So I could see the 20-year-old Ari who's having that recognition. And now as a parent who's sending my child to the army, you have two children in the army right now. It's amazing how those values and faith can overcome any sort of fear. That this feeling of being on a mission, a holy mission, and a much needed mission overcomes anything. I've seen, for example, in your life, how you are the most involved, active father who always knows where his kids are, who are always in touch with his kids. And you sent your daughter to the army during a war where she's stationed up north in a base that has been targeted. And I've seen how even in that position of father, you are so proud of your daughter for standing with Israel, defending Israel. And it's a reality that we see continuing to repeat itself. But now we'll get into the area of politics and government, is this just our destined reality, or is there something else that can be done in order to usher in new days of peace that our grandchildren won't have to do that? So let's move a little bit from your incredible childhood, personal life to your life of politics. When did you know that you wanted to enter government? Or did you know you ended up being in one of the most respected, important, coveted positions of chief of staff to the prime minister of Israel? How did you get from an LA boy to an Israeli soldier being bombarded by rockets from Hezbollah to the chief of staff to the prime minister of Israel?
It started, and really the great motivation took place in the army as well. I had a friend in the army whose name was Yoshua Friedberg. And Yoshua was a 24-year-old Canadian Ole. He had finished his university studies, and at the quote unquote, late age of 24, decided not only is he moving to Israel, but he's joining the army without his family, picked up and came here. And in a short period of time, a relatively short period of time, we became close friends. Served together in Golani. He was a great soldier, and I guess long story short, he was kidnapped one morning on his way to base by Arab terrorists and murdered. It was my unit who 3 or 4 days later found his body off the side of the road between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And that moment and that loss changed my life. Seeing how he picked up and left everything behind, not just his family. I mean, he had finished college already. He had his path laid for him in Canada, whereby he, his profession, his friends, and he decided that there were ideals and there were goals and there were actions that were more important than his own personal convenience and his own personal, goals. And it was at that moment that I decided that my life's path needs to be one of giving to the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And it wasn't clear to me day one that I wanted to go into government. I just knew that I wanted to do for the country and for the people. I started off working in the realm of Hasbara, in pro-Israel activism, pro-Israel activity anywhere I could find it. And that led me to a number of nonprofit organizations. And through the work of those nonprofits, I came into contact with a number of people within the political realm. And really the first person that really had a deep impact on me is currently a minister in the government, Ron Dermer. He was also Israel's ambassador to the United States. And from that moment on, he really became a mentor to me. And he brought me into the Netanyahu campaign when Netanyahu returned to politics in the early 2000s. And that was my first interaction with him, with Israeli politics and government. And that led me down the road and down the path towards the position that I ultimately ended up filling.
Incredible. That backstory gives so much meaning to your new book, which is called My Brother's Keeper, Netanyahu, Obama, and the Year of Terror and Conflict That Changed the Middle East, which is available at Amazon or wherever our listeners find the books that they read. When you entered politics, when you entered Netanyahu's government, you did not think, I'm sure, that you would be experiencing one of the worst crises Israel endured, definitely from the time that I moved to Israel. Kidnapping, murder, war. Tell us about that.
So the prime minister's office in general and the prime minister's activity is really unique in the sense that I truly believe that the position of Prime Minister of Israel is the most difficult position in the world. We're a country that is not the size of the United States. We're not the size of the UK or France or Germany, but the existential questions that are raised and the existential threats that we face never dissipate and never disappear. You're constantly dealing with security and defense questions and situations. Our international relations and diplomacy are always critical to the state of Israel, and so on and so forth. So it's not a position, I think Netanyahu once upon a time said that the United States is similar to like one of those huge battleships where it's just extremely large and powerful. And the one, I guess, challenge that those battleships have is to turn around, right? If they have to shift directions, it takes them a very, very, very long time. I mean, it takes many, many hours for them to turn things around. Israel is, I guess, again, fortunately and unfortunately, we're more like a speedboat, right? We're this little thing who, when needed, needs to turn on a dime. But when you're a speedboat and you're surrounded by threats, it makes for a very challenging reality. And working in the prime minister's office, we constantly faced challenges, always a crisis right around the corner. But as you said, there was nothing as dramatic as what we faced in the summer of 2014. The kidnapping of the three boys is a scenario that Israel really was not that familiar to. We have had our share of kidnappings in the past within Israel. Many times it's been military and security personnel. For example, the famous story of Nachshon Waxman. But to have civilians and to have three civilians and to have three children being those that were kidnapped really had the country on edge until we unfortunately found them murdered. And
So, Ari,
that,
take us back just for 1 second for our listeners that don't know that story. Maybe you could tell us what happened, what three boys were kidnapped, who are they kidnapped by? And you can tell us also through the lens of being inside the government at that moment.
sure, we're talking about early June in 2014, and it's a Thursday night, and two high school students learning in the Etzion block in Gush Etzion decided that they're going to get an early start on the weekend and leave their school, their dormitory, Thursday evening at around 9 p.m. And they walk out to the bus stop at the edge of the settlement. And at the bus stop, they bump into another individual, a boy that is just a year or two older than them, who too was looking to make his way back to the center of Israel for the weekend. And it's very commonplace within Judea and Samaria for residents to hitchhike. The public transportation there is more, sparse, and therefore they rely on each other to move from place to place. So when a car drove up playing Hebrew music, and there were two what seemed to be yeshiva boys in the car wearing their kippot and tzitzit, they figured that, this is a great opportunity to take one step closer to getting home. And it did not take long, within seconds of the three of them entering the car, a gun was pulled on them, and it was clear that they were abducted by terrorists. Ultimately, we learned weeks later that the terrorists murdered all three of them within minutes of abducting them. The two terrorists were members of Hamas. They were part of the large and, I guess, most prominent Hamas family in the region of Hebron. And the activity that Israel and the IDF took in trying to locate these boys, mind you, it took, I don't remember the exact amount, but it took a number of weeks until we were able to find the bodies. And then it took longer to find the actual terrorists, but we did. And in the aftermath of the abduction, Israel basically threw a large net over the entire region and began to arrest many Hamas activists. This led to Hamas in Gaza trying to support their co-terrorists by firing missiles and rockets into Israel. As the days went by and the weeks went by, those bombardments became larger and larger, and Israel's response in turn became quite significant until the moment came where Israel decided that enough is enough and we have to send in ground troops. So the abduction of 3 boys, which ultimately, as I said, their bodies were retrieved, national ceremony that the entire country, watched with teary eyes and heart wrenching, just horrific, really just merged into what ended up being the last Gaza war.
Thank you so much for that context. And it's incredible listening just to the story of your life, how we see in every way just history repeating itself, how we still have those Hezbollah terrorists who are firing at Israel when you were a soldier, firing right now at us. Just last week, actually, Fellowship Soup Kitchen had a direct hit in Kiryat Shmona from Hezbollah rockets. Those same terror rockets that were targeting you are now targeting the next generation of Israel and the elderly who are still there, and the soup kitchens and everything they could possibly hit in Israel. We see how Hamas is still trying to destroy Israel the same way they were trying to destroy Israel in 2014 when they kidnapped and murdered those boys. Ari, there are so many stories, so much wisdom, so much insight in your book, My Brother's Keeper, from that time of both handling in Israel the war and the terror and the decisions, to the international messaging, to the conflict between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu on how to handle certain situations. But it seems like everything is, in a way, very similar to what we're seeing today. Given your very in-depth personal experience, both from a government and a citizen level, do you think that this cycle could ever end? And what do you think we need to do in order to get there?
I think that if you take reverse the time machine just for a minute, and you don't have to go that far back. How long ago were we celebrating the Abraham Accords?
Yeah.
How long ago were Israelis en masse flying to Dubai and to Bahrain and to Morocco? It seems like a lifetime ago, but it really was just around the corner. And that is a reality that came as a result of very specific policies here in Israel. Abraham Accord was not a result of parts of the Arab world waking up one morning and saying, you know what, we want to have peace with these guys. It was them looking at reality straight in the eyes and recognizing and realizing that the threats that Israel faces are the same threats that they face from fundamentalist Islam and from Iran. And as such, they recognized that if they want to protect themselves on a regional basis, and if they want to expand their economic diversity, which has become a very big priority within the Gulf, then a relationship with Israel and peace with Israel is not nice to have, but it's a necessity. And in 2014, and the war in Gaza that took place then, we sent a very strong message to that region that we are not going to accept rockets into Israel. If we have to act, we are going to act. And this is a reality that is unattainable. There was another event that came on the heels of that actually took place in early 2015. And that was the Prime Minister's address to joint session of Congress. It was a very controversial speech. The President of the United States, Obama, was not very happy with the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu was going to address Congress. In a way, it was done within the political context of the U.S. By the Republican leadership. But Prime Minister Netanyahu recognized two very important things when he decided to go and give that speech, and I'll tie it into the current reality in a second, Yael. Number one, he decided, and he really defined his legacy by this up until October 7th, that the greatest threat to the state of Israel is Iran. And if I am invited to speak to a joint session of Congress, even if the president of the United States is not happy about it, I'm going to do this because of this threat. We need to bring this threat to the forefront of public discourse so that the nations of the world recognize that this is not something that we as a Jewish state will accept. And number survival, right? We love your support. We will not wait around for your support when it comes to our survival. And number two was that in the face of evil, Israel is going to act, even if it ruffles the feathers of the greatest friend we have and the greatest country in the world. And while much of the media focused at that time on the political rift between the United States and Israel, between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, what most of them missed was the messaging that was being sent towards the Gulf states. And not long after that, and mind you, the day of the Prime Minister's speech in Congress, many of those same Arab countries secretly reached out to the Prime Minister to congratulate and to show their support. That really was the beginning of what ultimately ended up becoming the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords brought numerous Muslim and Arab countries to the table and ultimately reached peace agreements with the state of Israel. That trajectory was very, very much clear and on its way until October 7th. So when you talk about how do we extract ourselves from the current reality and put ourselves back in a position where we're expanding peace and not war, it is those same lessons that we learned from 2014. Nobody makes peace with a weak partner. Nobody makes peace with a country that does not promote their common interests. And the common interest that Israel has with, let's call them the moderate and, those countries that are not part of the Iran axis. The only, or I should say the most important facet that Israel brings to the table is our ability, our military ability to stand up and defeat that evil. And the only way we can get back on track with that, be it Saudi Arabia, be it some of the other countries that are waiting in line to reach diplomatic relations with Israel. There were reports before October 7th that Indonesia, which is on the other side of the world, but one of the largest Muslim countries, was ready to begin diplomatic talks with Israel. None of them will move forward unless we defeat Hamas. None of them will move forward towards peace if they see weakness in Israel. None of them will move forward if Iran's reach in this region continues to grow and continues to expand.
It's fascinating. It reminds me of the biblical verse, Hashem oz le'amo yiten, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. That first, God gives strength to his nation, and God blesses his nation with peace. If we want to have relations with the Arab countries, we have to find something in common with them, and we have to serve a purpose. And what that is defeating terror. They are just as scared of terror as Israel is. The Iranian terror is just as much a threat to them as it is to Israel. In fact, I just saw today that in Saudi Arabia, there was someone holding up a Palestinian flag, and immediately the police came and took it, that it is illegal to hold up a Palestinian flag in Saudi Arabia because of what it represents. So It is an incredible journey that you've seen. We can speak for so much longer. I want to just take so much more wisdom and experience and put it towards understanding the situation now. So we'll have to have you back again, Ari. But as you know, as we're talking about the potential for peace and bridge building and how these incredible Abraham Accords have brought so much light to the Middle East, to Israel, to the entire world of what's possible. Most of our listeners are Christians, and there are some estimates over 700 million Christians around the world who stand with Israel. Being in the Netanyahu administration for so long, is that something that Prime Minister Netanyahu knows about? Is it something that the government of Israel knows about and appreciates? And is it something that you think is important to the future of Israel?
So, Prime Minister Netanyahu was really one of the early believers in the relationship. I don't think he beat your father, Yael, to holding that banner, but he was very, very early on in the process. He recognized the importance of our Christian friends around the world, and for the 30 years that he's been in politics, he has made it a central pillar of his outreach, not only to the US community, but around the world. And I think that today, maybe more than ever in Israel's history, the support of our Christian friends and brethren is needed and is critical for the state of Israel. We find ourselves facing a tsunami of hatred, a tsunami of ignorance, a tsunami of really diabolical association with those that are looking to destroy the state of Israel. And while we will do our part to stand up to this, this is, the Jewish state and the modern Jewish state that has the ability to stand on its own 2 feet. That can only be done with true support from our friends around the world. And whether it's in diplomatic circles, whether it's in political circles, whether it's in philanthropic circles, where every single one of our supporters around the world needs to allow their voice to be heard. We're living in a period now where really the essence of good versus evil, right versus wrong, is being challenged, is at the forefront of every conversation. And it's not enough for us to do what is right here in Israel. We need the support and the voices of Christian supporters all over the world to be heard loud and clear. And when that happens, I am positive that we will see the type of historic and miraculous turnaround in the state of Israel and around the world. Their support is just incredible. We are grateful for it, and we need to continue to hear it even louder and even clearer.
Ari Harow, author of My Brother's Keeper. If you want to hear more stories and get a little bit more behind the scenes from Prime Minister Netanyahu's administration, decisions and conflict between Netanyahu and Obama, as well as the areas that were beautiful and where there was deep friendship, mutual respect, you can buy Ari's book, My Brother's Keeper. I'll link it in the show notes. Ari, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your life with my listeners, and thank you for everything you do for Israel and the Jewish people.
Thank you, Yael, and thank the fellowship for really just, there's not a corner of Israel that you visit, that you tour, not an army base where you don't see the incredible work that you guys do. And as a citizen of Israel and as someone formerly in the government, I want to thank you and thank the fellowship for everything you do.